Oh, that's an interesting question. I feel like that might be one that would take us a couple of hours in a bar to get all the way through. But I'll take a crack at it. I'll try to think through some of the top kind of summary points. There's absolutely a risk that this technology gets used in ways that are not defensible, and they get challenged in a courtroom, and the opposing party finds that not reasonable care was taken, or the judge finds that reasonable care wasn't taken. So I think that for all of these products, we're going to have to spend some time thinking through at least kind of three avenues of evidence. So my first avenue of evidence is you should be able to explain how it works, right? And you should be able to explain how it works to sort of a reasonable degree of sort of defensibility, and it should be in a way that you kind of challenge. It's like, well, what if X was done differently? Should we expect Y? And so there's the how it works, right? And then there's the work we did as a company or as a technology provider providing a capability or a generative AI capability to the marketplace. So it's how it works, it's the work we did, and then there's a third facet, which is the work you do. And we have to empower you to be able to question and challenge the results for yourself. So the work that we do is we can go to other sort of matters and other companies and see how the tool and technology performed for them and the documents that they were trying to resolve and the matter they were trying to resolve. But at the end of the day, your data is going to be different. Your specific matter is going to be different. And if we don't empower you to validate for yourself, then we haven't given you a defensible tool.
I've become very careful and very selective in the voices that I listen to about the emerging uses of generative AI in legal technology applications. Dr. Aron Ahmadia is a voice that I pay close attention to and that I trust. We recently had an opportunity to have a conversation about these issues during Legal Week 2024 in New York City. And I think the conversation we had is an important one. The subject matters we talked about are important subject matters. And I really think the content that follows is worth the investment of your time to listen to. Folks, if we have not yet had a chance to meet, my name is Chad Roberts with eDiscovery Co-Counsel. We're a law firm that helps plaintiffs' lawyers with electronic discovery in complex litigation. Here's our visit and conversation with Dr. Aron Ahmadia.
Hello, I'm Aron Ahmadia. I'm a Senior Director of Applied Science at Relativity, and I'm happy to be here today.
Dr. Ahmadia, can I call you Aron?
Yes,
is that all right?
You call me Aron.
Thanks so much. And really thanks very much for this opportunity. We are here at Legal Week up in New York?
I think we're in New York.
Yep.
That's what it looks like out there.
And January in New York. And so I want to get right to the point because I know your time is precious. And I want to talk about mostly what you want us to know about this next generation of tools that you've been shepherding into the marketplace. But as background, folks are always curious what folks like you, what your background is, how did you come to do what you're doing, and what kind of profile background does someone like you have? So could you just give us a Reader's Digest version of your
of course.
background?
Yeah, of course. Okay, I grew up in Hawaii. I was born and raised in
Seriously?
Hawaii, and I always knew that I wanted to be working at the cutting edge of technology. That was what I wrote in my college application essay. I started in computer engineering because I thought that was going to be where stuff was cool. And then I spent a couple summers working in adaptive optics, which is definitely a form of AI where a telescope on the ground can act as if it's out in space and counter-effect all of the different effects of the atmosphere, and they do that by shining lasers into the sky. And it was very cool, and I realized that I didn't actually want to be a computer engineer anymore. I wanted to be a mathematician. And so I pivoted from an undergraduate degree in computer engineering to a PhD in applied mathematics. I was at Columbia University for a few years to do that. And then for the next 10 years, I didn't really know what I was doing. I worked abroad for a few years, and then I spent some time in the UK. When I came back to the US, I was working for the US Army Corps of Engineers on flood control and mitigation and predicting sort of waves and other sort of effects that might be important on a beach. Or storm surges and things like that, so other types of natural disasters. Somehow from the US Army Corps of Engineers, you can draw a line here. I went from working for the Department of Defense on predicting storm surge and hurricanes and tsunamis to finding weapons trafficking and sex traffickers on the internet. There's a thread there, which is that I was using software and I was using technology and I was using mathematics to help find criminals and to effectively assist the justice systems. This was my first touch of using technology to improve the efficiency of international justice. From there, I was recruited into Capital One, where I worked for 5 years. And at Capital One, I took 2 different roles. The first role that I took was leading and transforming customer service efforts within Capital One. So a company like Capital One receives about 500,000 phone calls a day. You have a large group of tens of thousands of customer service agents who handle calls and service them. Believe it or not, quite a few of the calls coming in to customer service are actually fraudsters trying to take over customer accounts or trick the agent into giving somebody an account password or otherwise doing things. And so we were really interested in how we could use AI to assist in sort of speeding up the review of these calls. And so what we did was we automatically transcribed the phone calls using AI, and then we used advanced search techniques to take calls that have been transcribed by the AI and then mine them and search them for things like patterns of fraud. Wow. And so phone call review is not that different from document review, but before I did that, I spent 2 years in what's called Capital One's Model Risk Office. And as a model risk officer, I oversaw a large portfolio of different types of machine learning models and AI that was operating in Capital One. And I would assist in what's called effective challenge, where somebody had developed the model and an executive over here was trying to determine whether that model was going to be fit for purpose or good for use within Capital One. And as a model risk officer, I was sort of an independent party who would come in and audit and review the model and help provide a sort of balanced point of view to the model owner or the executive responsible for the model on whether that model was appropriate for use. And again, even if a model is appropriate for use, there's still things that you want to sort of recommend in sort of its ongoing use and safekeeping for both the company and the customers.
Cool.
And then I found myself at Relativity, where I've been building up an applied science capability in the company for the last 2 years.
And really, was this your first dip in the pond of large language models and neural networks and things of that sort, or had your previous work touched on those a little?
Yeah, so I would say that the first time I touched neural networks was in grad school when I took a course on machine learning. And that would be, I'm dating myself, around 2006, 2007.
Okay, so not your first rodeo for
no,
that. No,
but large language models, as they are, have really been sort of prominent, I would say, for the last 6 or 7 years, starting with Google's paper, Attention is All You Need, kind of bringing the transformer architecture to popularity. And then as various companies and organizations have invested in them, OpenAI sort of most notably and also most publicly, we've seen this sort of rapidly increasing access and capability for these models to generate text, analyze text, and be used in other products and components. Yeah, so I grew up in Hawaii. I mentioned that earlier. What I didn't mention is that my mom was a plaintiff attorney. Good. And so I spent several years as a kid. I don't know if we should investigate this now. We're probably beyond the statute of limitations. Working for her law office, and I'm sure I was 12 by the time I did it. But I helped them set up. I remember their first Outlook Exchange environment where there were 5 computers and they were all wired together and there was an Outlook server. But I also helped out on a case or two, and I remember sitting at her office over a weekend, poring over file after file after file, figuring out what the file was about, entering a record, summarizing that in a little row in an Excel spreadsheet, and doing that through so that as she prepared her team for a trial, they would have the information they needed at their fingertips. So I did have a little bit of experience.
You come by this honest.
I come by this slightly honesty in the merits of this. I've also really learned how to be discovered, and I've spent a little bit of time talking about emails that I've written in a deposition. So I've been on both sides, I would say, of the desk, so to speak.
Yes. How will practitioners learn to understand what's under the hood of some of these products? Because we're either going to be defending them or advocating for their use or critiquing them and maybe saying this particular use is not appropriate in our roles as advocates. And so what do you think that we should know about this next generation of tool, and how do you think we should come by that knowledge?
That's a great question. One thing that I always find so fascinating about modern society is how we find and gain trust in ideas and concepts and tools. So I think without thinking about it, we walk out. I'll take an example from this morning. I walked out into a busy New York City street, and I looked down at my phone, which of course is its own technological wonder, right? We baked a pile of sand into some silicon and taught it to think, and then attached an antenna to it so it can communicate silently all the way around the world. But I summoned a stranger who I'd never met before to come in their car and then transport me up to this hotel up in Midtown. And again, we do this kind of stuff all the time. We just take it for granted. And if you ask me how a combustion engine works, or how a rideshare app ensures that the drivers that are picking me up and taking me here are safe and that the car will be clean, it's this whole fabric of trust. And when we think about the legal system and how the fabric of trust there is built and the tapestry is maintained, it comes down to the very heart of democracy, right? Yeah. If we don't believe in the justice system, that the justice system is fair and dispassionate and objective, then sort of all sorts of things in democracy start falling apart. So how do we introduce change to a system that is probably resistant to it by definition in order to protect the processes and protect objectivity? I think the first thing that you have to do is you have to demonstrate the value. So before you start talking about whether it's correct or whether they're right, whether it's defensible or anything like that, you first have to say there is an opportunity cost to not adapting this technology. So in adopting these technologies, the very first thing that we have to do, we have to demonstrate to the practitioners, to the members of the bar, to the members of the judiciary and the bench, that there is going to be an increase in access to justice, in efficiency of the system, if we can introduce these technologies and we can make them work.
How do we do that?
Well, how do we prove the value? We're doing what we're doing now, which is for the last 9 months, ever since GPT-4 was released, we've been integrating it into Relativity 1 as an e-discovery tool and observing ways that the technology could have assisted a review, could have provided information earlier, could have increased the quality or the facts available, helped find things that might have been missed. And as rigorously as we can, we've been trying to measure that difference, right? The value that it's bringing.
So let me guess, I'm trying to design, this is exciting. So I'm imagining an experiment where you may take some litigation that's resolved or wrapped up, and you can go back and see forensically what was produced, what was collected, what was produced, what was evaluated in the platform, how many people it took, how long did it take, what the cost was, and then coming behind them with the steam drill behind the labor force, and saying, if we had had the steam drill, here's how that same process could have gone, and maybe even a little bit better than it did.
It's definitely what we aspire to. No experiment is ever perfect, but that's definitely where we started. So we started with matters that, and again, I'll borrow a term of art, and I don't know if it's a great one, but the matter is dead.
Okay.
It's been a few years. Whatever the result is, it's been settled. There were two, I would say, use cases that were better in some sense. So one use case that we found was internal investigations, where information was sought out and it was investigated and it was reviewed in a similar manner to a request for production, but it wasn't necessarily done with the sort of same level of sort of stakes if information wasn't correctly produced, et cetera. Another type of matter that we found relatively useful early was a third-party subpoena, where somebody was requested or required to produce information, but they weren't necessarily the party that was on the hook. They weren't the defense. They weren't even a plaintiff. They were just sort of involved.
Right.
So those two situations were early, and we found those. But we actually, before we released into LGA, some of our customers did evaluate the use of this tool in live matters, where the model was not necessarily making any final calls, but it did inform the defendants or the producing party in terms of information that they might be interested in or that could be available to them.
Wow. What kinds of use cases do you see coming down the pipeline for, little old litigators like your mom was, that it might trickle down someday to small and medium-sized shops?
Yeah, I mean, generative AI is going to have a transformational impact on the industry. It'll be hard to identify every use case that could come up. I will say that my mom was a plaintiff, typically facing small armies of defense teams whenever she went to court. And one thing that I think that plaintiffs or receiving parties are often at a disadvantage of is they can receive almost a literal deluge of information to react to or respond to or try to go looking through to find what was actually important for them. And so a tool like Air for Review will be extremely helpful in that situation because it gives you a force multiplier in terms of your ability to quickly identify important insights and important documents that you might otherwise miss if you're trying to use typical or sort of traditional methods, whether that's keyword search or TAR.
Let me just throw some use cases out
Sure.
there. And you thumbs up, thumbs down.
Okay.
Privilege logging.
Privilege logging is definitely going to be on target for our upcoming tool, Air for Privilege Review, or Air for
Something.
Air for Privilege.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Privilege Review is definitely a use case. Air for Privilege will be an upcoming tool, and it will include privilege logging.
Wow. Including the little summary, the challenge of summarizing the context without disclosing
Revealing any information.
the privilege.
Exactly.
But enough to know if a privilege likely exists.
Yeah.
Wow. I won't even ask you how you throttle that. I mean,
Right. How do you adjust it to become more or less defensive, for example?
Yeah.
I think that I don't want to sort of, it's an unreleased product, so I
Yes,
don't want to say
right.
what will exactly be in
Sure.
the tooling. But I will say one thing that's incredibly important for privilege is that you need access to other information outside of the four corners of the document.
Right.
And so it's insufficient to just use a large language model for a privilege review. You have to manage and provide additional context to the model.
We know
and
that
to the
much so
product.
far.
Yeah, we know that. So
Are those RAGs,
Is it retrieval augmented generation? So retrieval augmented generation, I think, caught fire as a term for very good reasons. And one is that there were many early concerns about hallucination, and there was also the magic of a chat-like interface where you ask a question and you get an answer. And retrieval augmented generation is a very open-ended capability. It ties in directly to the search engine, and it says, hey, I have this question. What documents might be interesting that could answer this question? Now, that's a blessing and a curse at the same time. And the reason it's a blessing is because I can ask any question I want, and I can answer to any question I ask in less than 10 seconds. Why is it a curse? Well, it's a curse because unless you know a lot about how large language models work, you know a lot about how that search engine works, and a lot about everything that's going on between when you type your question and when you get an answer, the model will behave in really unexpected ways. And I'll give you an example. So I recently got a chance to use some retrieval augmented generation with an office productivity suite. And it's super cool. It's connected to everything, right? It's like my email, my documents that I'm editing, my
Are you telling me
spreadsheets.
Clippy's coming back?
Hold on. I'm not done yet.
Clippy's coming back?
Hold on.
We heard it here first?
So no, hold on.
Okay, sorry. Just got excited
so
there.
I'm in this chat interface, and I say, hey, how many emails did the CEO send me last year? And it was like, dun, 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 10. I was like, this is amazing. How cool is this? It knows who the CEO is and knew that there were 10. And then it had like a little list of citations of the 10. I'm like, oh, I've got another one. How many emails did my boss send me last year? And it was like, 10. I'm like, NFW, my boss sends me an email every 3 days. There's no way he only sent me 10. And I look back, and of course, now I know a little bit about how these models work, right? When I ask the question, it goes to the search engine, and then it only considers the top 10 responses when it generates a response. Can you think of how many different ways that could cause lots of problems in an e-discovery setting?
Right.
So that's one example. I'll give you another. It used to be that if you asked Google, what year did Tom Hanks land on the moon, it would very, very confidently say, 1973. And that's because Google was very early in retrieval augmented generation. They tied it back into their knowledge base. But what they would do is they would sort of confabulate Tom Hanks with Neil Armstrong, or in whatever actor he was playing. I mean, they didn't even get to the moon in that movie.
Right.
But it would muddle those facts together, and it would just immediately think that I was asking about the Neil Armstrong moon landing, and it would give that back confidently as a fact. Now, if you do that now, Google will correct you.
Yes.
But the very first versions of a retrieval augmented generation coming from Google could sort of muddle facts like this, even if it had access to the right answer. If you frame it in a slightly wrong way, you might get the wrong answer without even realizing you'd asked the wrong question.
What do we call that technique where we want to limit the responses to our own domain-defined corpus, right? So here's 100,000 documents. I want to ask you some questions, but I want to limit the knowledge base of focus to those 100,000 and not the world or the internet since 2023. What do we call that, and how do we do it?
Got a very bad answer for you here, Chad.
Okay, all right.
The answer is...
Hit it.
The answer is, did I get out of focus?
No, you're good.
Oh, okay. Chad, I've got a very bad answer for you. The answer is fantasy. We call that fantasy. That specific technique doesn't exist. So, large language models are in the business of completing text. Large language models are trained on typically the internet, or you could have a large language model that was initially trained on the internet and then, for example, fine-tuned on a legal corpus.
Yes.
But there are no products in the market right now that can simultaneously consider, let's say, 500,000 documents in an e-discovery universe and then answer all questions about those documents. The large language models are always looking at a subset of information that fits into what is their so-called context window. So there's a variety of tricks to generate answers around those 500,000 documents, but no technology considers all of the information in them simultaneously at once without doing a considerable amount of more work. For example, to build up a knowledge graph to identify sort of key actors or facts. Effectively, you would have to redo all of the things that we do in e-discovery to get a technology to that point. So I guess the other way to answer that question would be an e-discovery team. The most important way to manage risk and to increase trust is to control the scope of the model. That is to say, understand exactly what it is that you're going to do with it and keep that box as tight as possible. So if I say, I'm going to build a product that assists you in your first pass review, where you have a matter and you're going to say that the document is responsive or non-responsive, I can say that is a reasonably well-scoped problem. Not perfectly scoped, because, oh my gosh, you could bring 1,000 different types of matters, and I've certainly seen them now. And they're wildly different, like what makes a document relevant or not. The types of documents are, you get an email, you get text messages, you get emoji. And so there's all sorts of things that make the scope already hard in e-discovery. The only thing left to me to control is how many things I promise I'm going to be able to do. So if I have an open-ended tool, like a chat interface or something like that, I'm not saying that they're not valuable. They are. They're incredibly valuable. Are they easy to control? Are they easy to trust? No. And that's, I talk about sort of different levels of trust in terms of how one of these tools work. And there's sort of, you sort of trust by almost direct evidence. It's the thing that I want, right? So I ask a question like, hey, is there a document somewhere in this corpus where Aaron sends an email to his boss? And then you find an email, and lo and behold, I'm like, hey, boss. And it's like, okay, that is exactly what I was looking for. Now, what if we ask the other question? Hey, Aaron, are there examples of Aaron failing to send an email to his boss in the month of December? Well, if the model says, I can't find any, is it because no emails exist, or because we didn't ask the wrong question? Right? Or we didn't ask it in the right way. But I want to talk a little bit about modern medicine, because it has a lot of parallels with modern law. Now, if I have a medical concern and I go to a doctor, this person is very busy. They see hundreds of patients. The amount of time that they have that they can personally invest in me, in understanding the context of what I'm coming for, they get a chance to read a case file. Sometimes they get some information right, sometimes they don't. But they're very, very capable, competent people who are extremely thinly spread.
Yes.
Now, does that have parallels? Of course. In law, even if you have an attorney who is solely dedicated to your case, they may have 10 million details that they are trying to track down, keep track of, be responsible for. And so as soon as technology has become available that lawyers can use and trust, they always have taken advantage of technology to organize their information, to conduct search, to manage electronically stored information. Now, this will be another tool that helps amplify the capability of attorneys to manage, store, and process information. And right now it's so new that it can be hard to see how that trust will evolve or where people will be using it. But I really think that this analogy of supporting people or supporting attorneys to be more effective is really the one to kind of keep in your head. We're not automating the workforce or doing anything along those lines. We're really helping people become more effective.
So two things that worry me a little bit about or just two concerns that I have based on your answer. One is, I'm already being pitched products in the marketplace that sound so pie in the sky, that it's like the easy button. I just have to hit the easy button, and all my discovery problems are going to pop out in a nice brief, and it's all going to be great. And no one's expressing any reservation of here are the things you need to do to make sure this stays between the rails. And so we've all heard about a handful of lawyers using ChatGPT for improper purposes in a careless way. And we're largely unregulated. This is a market. Do you see a concern that over-exuberant folks in the marketplace can want to get to market with, be the first with some feature, be the first with some application, and there's a risk that we could stumble on the trust factor of perhaps going backwards and doing harm for ourselves if we're not careful with how we use this?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I feel like that might be one that would take us a couple of hours in a bar to get all the way through. But I'll take a crack at it. I'll try to think through some of the top kind of summary points. There's absolutely a risk that this technology gets used in ways that are not defensible, and they get challenged in a courtroom, and the opposing party finds that not reasonable care was taken, or the judge finds that reasonable care wasn't taken. So I think that for all of these products, we're going to have to spend some time thinking through at least kind of three avenues of evidence. So my first avenue of evidence is you should be able to explain how it works, right? And you should be able to explain how it works to sort of a reasonable degree of sort of defensibility, and it should be in a way that you can kind of challenge. It's like, well, what if X was done differently? Should we expect Y? And so there's the how it works, right? And then there's the work we did as a company or as a technology provider providing a capability or a generative AI capability to the marketplace. So it's how it works, it's the work we did, and then there's a third facet, which is the work you do. And we have to empower you to be able to question and challenge the results for yourself. So the work that we do is we can go to other sort of matters and other companies and see how the tool and technology performed for them, and the documents that they were trying to resolve and the matter they were trying to resolve. But at the end of the day, your data is going to be different. Your specific matter is going to be different. And if we don't empower you to validate for yourself, then we haven't given you a defensible tool.
How are we going to learn to do that? Because there's no school right now. There's just the products, right? How would you recommend someone that wants to climb that mountain in the way that you contemplate? How do we go about doing it? How do we go about doing it without getting a PhD in information science?
Well, it's a PhD in applied mathematics.
Applied
just
mathematics.
To be clear, it's
just
all right.
To be clear.
It's all right.
Yeah.
No, we should be clear. Just let the record state.
Yes, because
the Dr. Ahmadia has a PhD in applied mathematics.
Right.
Okay, so how does somebody climb the mountain of trust? And I think that there is going to be some places you can imagine, and just stay with me on this. Imagine a graph with two axes. And on one axis, everybody's clear on this one, it's just value, right? So I go from left to right. The more I walk along this one, the higher the value. And then the y-axis going up and down, that's risk, right? So where do we not start? High risk, low value.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
We've got to find stuff that's highest value and lowest risk. And there's a bunch of places where we can apply this technology, and it's high value, low risk. Remember the situation we talked about earlier where we just wanted to find out if I'd sent an email to Greg in December, and if we could find one that would be useful. That's a high value, low risk activity. Because if I don't find the email, I'm going to move on to other ways of locating that email, or just deciding that I don't know the answer to whether it was sent or not. But if I do find it, that helps advance my case, and it's worth the 5 minutes of time to enter the query into the tool. There are other examples as well. So one of my favorites, I think, that's going to be very early is QC. So I can take a sample of any kind of review that was done, and I can quickly check to see if the model agrees or disagrees with the label that was applied. And if it disagrees, those are probably the ones that I'm most interested in. Why does the model think that this is responsive when the human reviewer didn't? Did they miss something? Was the review protocol not clear?
Right.
What were the facts of it? And so QC will be a very early use case. It's not going to be the only one. If I'm a receiving party and I have no other resources available to me, right? It's just myself. I could potentially get through a small mountain of documents using a technology or a tool like this that I would otherwise never have been able to go look through, especially if I'm certain that
Right.
there is something in there and I just need to find it.
Right.
And so that's going to be too early, sort of, let's call them low risk use cases. And then we'll eventually get more comfortable, more confident. I think there are going to be situations where the receiving party is going to say, yeah, sure, use generative AI, we're open. And then you just have to use the same defensible processes you used when you were using technology-assisted review. And the statistical techniques, the validation, those all carry over into using a tool like this.
I'll give you an example. What's some of the first products that I thought, wow, this is a living in predictive modeling or predictive coding. And then some folks would say, well, we're doing that TAR 2.0 thing where we're going to send you the most predicted documents next. But if you don't sprinkle in some back-end content without telling the person that you're doing it, you're not literally giving them the most predictive content, literally. You're doing that generally, but you're also sampling from the back end, sprinkling it up there, and that keeps you from creating what I call a donut hole, where you miss something, right?
Yep.
You self-validate, and you go, well, that's it. I'm down to 40% predicted responsiveness, and there's this big, monstrous 800-pound thing out there that you've completely missed because you came from the top down without a bias. And then when I learned that some platforms had that feature to sprinkle up and make sure you weren't, self-biasing, and older models didn't, it was pretty sobering, and so it took years to where I would say, I'll let you use that model. I'll let you use predictive modeling if you use A, B, or C, but I'm not comfortable with D, E, or F, for example. And so I can't imagine how to even ask those questions right now with some of the generative AI use cases and how lawyers are going to want to become knowledgeable enough to challenge defensibility or defend defensibility. And how do we get that knowledgeable?
It's going to be a journey of multiple steps. I think one of the first things that we need to do is demonstrate the value of the technology. I said that earlier. I think it's worth repeating, which is to say, before I say, hey, it's worth your time to decide whether you're going to accept this or not, I need to give you a headline or hey, I'm going to save you 75% of the cost of your review, or I'm going to find 10% of the things that, or I'm going to help your senior attorneys find 10% more things. And I'm going to sort of give you those things. And it's like, well, if somebody is assisted by this tool, they tend to change about 10 to 20% of their answers that they had given before they looked at its output, because it tends to find things that they miss, or it builds up a case or an explanation that they sort of otherwise would have said no to. So I would start with that, right? Building up that, again, I think it's going to be a small mountain of evidence that there is value.
Yes.
But after we find the value, then we have to say, well, how are we managing the risks and the defensibility of its use? And then I have to find other examples. I have to say, well, we compared this tool to contract reviewers, and we gave the contract reviewers a review protocol, we answered their questions, we QC'd it, and then we had this tool go over the exact same mountain of documents. Now, this tool had a lower precision than the contract reviewers. The contract reviewers were at 90% precision, and our tool wasn't doing much better than 60%. Again, on a first pass,
Right.
It wasn't giving any iteration or feedback. But when we reviewed the answers that the contract reviewers had, and we reviewed the missing documents, we found that Air for Review had found 97% of the responsive documents. And do you know how many the contract reviewers found?
How many?
What's your guess?
Oh, man. 45.
Yeah, 50%, 50
Wow.
to 55%. We found almost twice as many responsive documents using this
Wow.
tool. Live matter, active litigation, real case.
Wow. So
But I don't want to do that just once,
Yes.
right?
So the
you're gonna believe me if I do this 10 times.
Right. So the upside's there. The upside's there. I still don't think people like me have a clear path to learning right now. And I know you all have written white papers, and there's some people that have contributed to broadening the body of knowledge and making the knowledge more accessible and democratizing the knowledge base. Some folks in this business used a phrase a long time ago where they said, where there's mystery, there's margin. You ever heard that? Where there's mystery, there's margin.
Phrase.
Yeah, and my hair stood up when I heard it, which was the more black boxish we keep things, the more mysterious and the more margin there is. And so I want, I have this concern that there's two conflicting sort of things sometimes that I think the industry needs us to be knowledgeable and implementers and early adopters, and then if the industry could be mindful that there's this other need of the early adopters that needs a little bit of a deep dive, or generative AI university where it's beyond the 1 hour panel that we're all doing right now. You know what I'm saying? And,
Look, you recruit a group of 20 attorneys who think that it's a great idea to spend a day in a room with me, and I will teach the class. So we'll figure it out.
I'm rolling. I'm marked that. We're at time 52. I'm going to mark that one.
It might have to be in DC.
It'll be anywhere you want.
Yeah.
Sure.
I wish we could just turn this camera around on you and interview you for 15 minutes now on what you think is needed. I recognize that it's going to be a monumental challenge to help, not just, again, starting from proving the value, walking forward into addressing the risks, understanding how it could fit in a way that the courtrooms would find acceptable. It's going to require many, many people, both inside and outside of Relativity, to be successful here. And so within Relativity, we've made a strategic hire. Chris Haley is joining us as the VP of Practice Empowerment for AIR, and this I'll just say it's going to be his full-time job, right? Is helping people understand the merits of this transformation.
Right.
But we still have, I would say, to me, the most important thing is reaching out to the plaintiffs, helping them understand the value in two ways. One, how they can incorporate this into their own practice, but also helping them to feel comfortable if a producing party is suggesting that they do this, helping them feel comfortable that this is a good idea.
If there's transparency. That's my soapbox.
Well, I think it's the appropriate level of transparency.
Yes.
And I think I wasn't around for the sort of introduction of TAR into sort of the adversarial process.
Yes.
But what people have told me is that we didn't get it right, and that we spent too much time focusing on how you could use TAR to come to some sort of advantage, as opposed to using TAR to bring efficiency to the legal system.
And create access to justice.
And create
for
access
everybody.
to justice. That's right.
Not just making corporate America save money, but potentially granting access to justice for people that couldn't otherwise afford it.
Increasing access to justice, right? I mean, that was what my mom did as a plaintiff for her entire career. If I can continue that in some way with some Python code and a little bit of mathematics and statistics, then I'll feel pretty good about myself.
We're about time for our benediction. Let me just ask you first, what do you want people like me to know?
Oh man, you're already doing it.
Okay.
We're here, we're being curious, we're having a dialogue, we're not coming in with sort of preconceived notions that we're holding fast to. We're looking at the evidence, we're considering it. We're being great attorneys. I'm not an attorney, but you are. I know that just from interacting with you in our conversations. And so the thing that has distinguished and separated and made attorneys great probably over the last several centuries has always been their ability to investigate, to understand, and to take advantage of the capabilities and tools in front of them.
Keep being curious.
Keep being curious.
All right.
Keep being skeptical too. Don't take these statements without your own investigation. Ask for the details. Ask for more information.
Dr. Ahmadia, thanks for your time and for Relativity, giving up some of your time for this. Really appreciate it. We'll see you on the circuit. I know you ride the circuit and help with the outreach, and people value that very much. So I'm sure we'll see you around.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Take care.
How you doing?